Hello and welcome to our fourth talk of the research of the series Internationale Forscherinnen of the University of Applied Sciences FernFH. Today I'm really happy to welcome Professor Leonhard Lades. He is a professor of behavioral and environmental economics at the University of Stirling, but also director of the Stirling Behavioral Science Center. And that's the reason why we know each other. He is also honorary treasurer at the International Association for Research in Economic Psychology. I'm very happy to welcome Leonhard because he is by training an economist, but he looks into psychological phenomena from a different angle than psychologists probably usually do. And I believe this is very, very interesting for us. And the other side, why I'm really happy to have Leonhard here is because he's doing research in environmental economics. Bridging policy with science, also looking into ethical applications and also welfare economics, which is probably something some of our students are not aware of. And he's presenting today his research on different aspects. He will answer quite a few questions. For example, what economic and psychological factors influence our daily environmentally friendly behavior. And he's doing so by using a specific technique or method, the day reconstruction method. So I hope I did present you correctly, Leonhard. Please let me know if I forgot anything which is important when we start now. Probably what is important, as I said before, for everyone who is now joining in, please, if you want to ask a question during the talk, especially if you don't understand any, there's something you want to clarify because of understanding, then please raise your hand and I will open the microphone. Other questions then for understanding better the topic, please wait for the end of the talk. For organization, I think it would be better to just really have clarification questions. So thank you very much. And Leo, please let me know if I forgot anything which is important to you.
Thanks a lot, Eva. Yeah, that's really great. Thanks a lot for the kind. It's really nice to be introduced with my name correctly. You know, since 11 years, I'm not in the German-speaking world anymore, and I had Lades, Lades, very different versions of this. So thanks a lot. I appreciate this more than I had anticipated. So thanks a lot. It's really great that I can speak here and to share a little bit about pro-environmental behavior in everyday life. I will share my slides in a second. I will just tell you that I will talk about pro-environmental behavior. So what are pro-environmental behaviors? Things like flying and investing in heat pumps or retrofitting your home or installing solar PV panels or buying an electric vehicle. These are all environmental behaviors, and I'm not talking about them today. So I'm talking about pro-environmental behaviors in everyday life. And these would be stuff like heating your home, which you do every day, taking the train or the bicycle rather than the car, or actually eating meat or not eating meat for the environment's sake. So this is the type of work I will present today, where we focus on the everyday life. So that's one of the aims, try to see whether we can understand this a little bit better, pro-environmental behavior in everyday life. And the other aim is also to do a little bit of maybe a marketing for this day reconstruction method that Eva mentioned. It is a method that I think is underutilized in psychological and economic research. And I'm kind of enthusiastic about this method. I know it has problems and it has disadvantages, but it also is exciting to use the method because it can provide different types of data that we otherwise wouldn't have. And this is data about how we live our lives. What are the key experiences that we have in our everyday, in our totally normal everyday life? It's not something special where we put people like in a lab experiment or in an implicit association test, a difficult psychological test. What this method tries to do is to identify how people are in their everyday life. So like but it's important, to understand our everyday experiences and the desires that we have and what we do in everyday life. I think this is really important. And this is a nice method to illustrate that. So it will be observational. It will be like taking a picture of the lives of people. And I think this is meaningful. And hopefully can convince some of you that this indeed is meaningful. And I will talk mainly in the context of environmental behavior about this today. Let's share the slides. And if you tell me if they are not there, if you're silent, I will assume that everything works fine. Great. Okay, so this is, you see in the background, that's the beautiful campus of the University of Stirling, as one of the most beautiful campuses in the world, I believe, especially in the sun. So it's a good place to be. That's where I am since April, so I'm happy to be there. Okay, what I'm going to do today is talk about the motivation, a little bit about why and what I'm doing later on, then 3 studies. All of them deal with pro-environmental behavior. Study 1 and 2, general. The first on economic preferences, the second one on subjective well-being, happiness. And then the third study I present is on one specific type of pro-environmental behavior, that is meat consumption. And then I have one conclusion slide, so very short. The motivation. So for the motivation, I really wanted to highlight that I think it is exciting and interesting and of scientific importance to measure everyday experience, to measure what we do in everyday life. And I bring you one example for this, and this is in the COVID pandemic. That's my only COVID paper that I had, and I'm happy that this is the only one because I didn't want to focus my whole research on this, but I think it is a really good example of a situation where our everyday experience was very different. So I present you data from the 2nd or 3rd week of the COVID-induced lockdown in spring 2020, because our everyday experience was different then than it is now and than it was before. So let's look at the main results graph, and I'll explain to you what this graph shows. Now you can see that there's activities, there are locations, personal interactions, and remote interactions. And let's start with the activities. You can see exercising, going for a walk, and so on. And then you see the blue dots, they represent happiness, and the red dots represent something like unhappiness or negative emotions. I zoom in a little bit to the activities. So for example, you see that exercising was associated with quite a lot of positive emotion. That is the blue dot. Basically, that means that when people told me in the survey that they were exercising, they also told me that at the same time they were quite happy. And at the same time, they were not unhappy. Now, these blue squares or diamonds, they are an indication of how strong this effect is. And you see the effect would be stronger, so they are happier when they're exercising than when they're going for a walk, then when they're gardening and so on. These are the happiest emotions. And then you see these horizontal lines. These are measures of precision. They're called 95% confidence intervals, but for you, it's enough to know that they are measures of precision. For example, you see that these measures of precision are very wide for praying, worshipping, and meditating, because we don't have much data. Not many people in our data set were praying, worshipping, or meditating, so we don't have a good information about this. It's not a very precise measure. However, going for a walk is quite, they are narrow, the little horizontal lines, so it's quite a precise estimate. So that's the difference, and that's so what we can see is basically people are happy when they're exercising, going for a walk, gardening, pursuing a hobby, taking care of children. And I think this already is interesting, especially if you compare it with the same data that we had 3 years before 2020. So in 2017, we ran a similar study, also in Ireland. This is Irish data. And then the most happy activities were stuff like going to a restaurant, going out with friends, going to the cinema, I will show you where the data is coming from in a second. This is, out of the lockdown period, there were very different types of activities where people were really happy. And now the happy activities are these exercising, going for walk, gardening. These outside activities are still happy. Now let's have a look.
Leo,
Yeah.
there's a question. Is this quantitative data based on a diary?
I will show you on the next slide where it comes from. This is just to get the intuition. It's just a bit of the motivation. I will have many, many slides showing you screenshots of that diary. You're totally right. It's diary data. So yeah, it's good question. This is just, to create some intuition and to create some feeling for why this might be interesting. At the bottom, you can see informing myself about COVID is the worst activity. People didn't have a lot of, this is this doom scrolling, being on the news and also reading all the bad stories, also working or studying. That's kind of what you're doing right now. Apologies for that. Shopping, schooling children as well was a really tough activity with a lot of negative effect. So you see, it's interesting for some people to see that taking care of children is a nice activity, and down there schooling children is a really bad activity. So as you can see here, it's very rich data, and different people will find different things interesting. So I'm just taking a screenshot of what's happening in everyday life, and the everyday lives of people, what their experiences are, and then different people can interpret it differently. And policymakers have interpreted this. So we showed this data to the Irish policymakers, and I don't know if it is because of this data that we showed them, but it was the case that in Ireland, people were allowed to go for a walk and to be in gardens and to exercise more than in other countries. And maybe one of the reasons was that maybe we presented this data and the Irish policymakers realized that these are the remaining positive activities in everyday life. All the other things that used to be really good, like going to the cinema and the restaurant and so on, they were gone. In Ireland, the pub as well, to be honest. So you can also see that there are different locations. So if people are outdoors or in nature, then they're really happy and not very unhappy. And if they are at work or at a shop, they are not very happy, but rather unhappy. You can see other things. Personal interactions are great with friends and pets, and not so good with work-related personal interactions. And then the last one you can see in panel D, remote interactions with your pet seem to be really good. Obviously, that is not happening very often. And you can also see that the horizontal line is very wide. So not many people were actually remotely interacting with their dog or the cat. So it's not, you shouldn't take this too serious. But anyways, so this is just, it should give you an idea that this type of data is rich. We can speak for half an hour about this and everybody finds another little story about this. Now, what are other ways to communicate everyday experiences? You could use surveys, or you could use qualitative data and, have words explaining the everyday experience. There are many ways, but I believe this is a really good way to communicate how people feel and what they're doing in their everyday lives. So that's why I like this method. Now to the question that one of you asked, where is this coming from? This is what we asked people. So how do we measure these everyday experiences? And this is now step 1 of a day reconstruction study exercise. For this particular study, we asked for 3 episodes. So we told people, please think of your day yesterday as if it was a movie. And as in every movie, there are different scenes. We will call these scenes episodes. And now please think about that scene or that episode that you had yesterday at 9 o'clock. And 9 o'clock was a randomly chosen time. It could also be 3 in the afternoon or 11 in the morning. So that was randomly chosen. And then we asked them, please give this episode a name. It might be starting to work or just having breakfast. And then what did you do and how did you feel? And then people responded to this. And it didn't really make sense what they wrote there. This was only for them to remember and better recall what had happened yesterday. It's only a memory aid. We are not interpreting what they write there, and we tell them that. And then we ask for the second episode and the third episode as well. Now that's the first step of everyday reconstruction mechanism study. Then we show them how they called the episode, and we show them what they wrote about this. And then we ask, how did you feel during this specific episode? Now, in people's minds, they are really thinking about, say, what happened between 9 and 10 through that method. So please mark the number between 0 and 6 that best described how you felt. A happy, calm, tired, sad, frustrated, and so on. So the happiness or positive effect, blue dots that I showed you earlier, were a mix of happy and calm and relaxed. So the average of this. The red dots were a mix of sad, frustrated, annoyed, and worried, anxious, I believe. So that's where the data is coming from. I hope you get a little bit of an idea where this is coming from. Now, this is the day reconstruction method by Daniel Kahneman, who sadly recently passed away, known for many other things, but he also was heavily involved in designing this day reconstruction method idea to measure the everyday experience. So the typical day reconstruction study, you first reconstruct your day, you fill out a short personal diary that is either personal for yourself, or the researchers tell you you will not use that, they will not use that data. Then you divide the previous day into episodes as if each episode was a scene in a movie. And that helps you to reflect upon what you did and how you felt at these specific times yesterday. And then you answer follow-up questions for each individual specific episode, where that system helps you to really remember what you did yesterday. So it goes through, online we showed them what they had written on the next page of the survey. Now, what this is doing, a little bit more abstractly, it is asking people about how they, for example, feel right now. If I ask you right now, how happy are you right now? It's relatively easy for you to say, well, very happy or not so happy. And if I ask you, okay, on a scale from 1 to 7, for most of us, it's relatively easy to come up with a number. I'm now giving a talk, so it's a 7. I'm loving to give a talk. I don't know, I'm a bit introverted, so but you could easily say a number there. It's a relatively easy question to answer, and it's a question where you don't start thinking and cognitively reflecting about what the answer should be. Most of the time when we do psychological and also survey research in economics, these questions are of a type where they invite you to cognitively reflect and think hard about the answer. So on a scale from 1 to 7, how satisfied are you with your life overall? That is a question where when you want to answer it, you start thinking, what's my job? What's my private situation? And then you start evaluating. It's a very different cognitive process that is happening here. And it's really interesting. Both of them are really interesting. I just do believe that most of our research is on the area of life satisfaction and in this type of cognitive reflection. And there's not too much research on the experience, what people feel in their everyday lives. So that's one reason why I really like the day reconstruction method, because it gives us more information about the everyday experience. Some people would argue data quality might even be better because it's a simpler question to answer. Okay, I'm totally aware of many disadvantages of the method, and that's totally fine. So it is self-reported, and as a good economist, I should hate self-reported data, but I don't, I think there's truth in what people report themselves. So fair enough. It is a criticism, and we just live with it. It is also recalled data. So it is memory data from yesterday. How did you feel yesterday? It is not real time, but it is close to real time. So it is still a disadvantage that there might be memory biases. It can be time consuming for the respondents. If you do a day reconstruction method and go through the whole day, you might have up to 20 episodes that can take 45 minutes. That's tough. In the COVID example, we only had 3 episodes. So that was a 15-minute survey. That was fine. So, but it can be time consuming. High frequency fluctuations are not captured. So if there are changes from minute to minute, we just can't capture that. It's rather changes from hour to hour that we can capture. And then, is it philosophical or methodological? Can we translate feelings into numbers? We just do it, and a lot of psychological research does it. So let's bracket that. Now, why I'm excited.
Sorry, may I ask a question? Maybe I didn't understand, but you said actually that it's a kind of a diary, and you ask for 3 episodes. And I saw the sheet, so it's about 9 o'clock. Please tell me about the episode, right? So when it's up to 20 episodes, are you asking for like you're asking about the last day, or are you sending the diary or the questionnaire at 9 o'clock and then again at, say, for example, at 11 o'clock? What are you doing there?
Yeah, the typical day reconstruction method that Kahneman and his colleagues suggested were paper-based, and they would be the whole day, and they would be for yesterday in order to get information about the whole day. Some people might have 20 episodes, others might have 6 because they're a very long episode, and one episode they call working. So it's then often up to the respondents themselves how to divide their day into different episodes. So that one of the last point of the advantages there is the high flexibility. So we use the day reconstruction method in various different ways. It is flexible. So in the COVID study, we said, okay, you start at 9, others start at 3, others start at whatever. And then we do 3 episodes from then because we had a large sample size. You know, and that way we we need to have it short because it's almost nationally representative samples. It's too expensive to have them 45 minutes filling out the whole day. And if you have only 3 episodes, you can also ask more detailed questions. So I show you more examples later on of different ways of designing this survey, and maybe that helps to see different ways of doing these diaries and organizing the study. Okay. The second advantage, well, there is lower recall bias, especially compared to global surveys. You know, there is some recall bias, but not that much. An alternative, and that also answers your question, Eva, is to use smartphone studies. Can't see them. A smartphone study is called experience sampling or ecological momentary assessment. They beep, say 5 times a day at random points and ask you, how happy are you right now? And what are you doing right now? You know, that is maybe, some people say, even better data because it doesn't have the memory bias. But if you ever have participated in a study like this, they are so annoying for participants. So whenever I started, you know, and it beeps and then I can't be bothered after a while anymore. So these studies have clear disadvantages as well. You don't have that disadvantage with the day reconstruction method. So I think they are both complementary. Sometimes experience sampling, the smartphone study might be better, and sometimes the diary-based might be better. The experience sampling studies are also more costly, and you have to spend more money to run them at high sample size. And the day reconstruction method, we get easily to nationally representative samples. So that's a big benefit, I believe. Okay, so that's the motivation. If there are questions on the study, you will learn a little bit. I have some more screenshots about the diary method for each of the papers that I'm showing you. So let's look at pro-environmental behaviors that we will measure using this day reconstruction study method. And we will look at economic preferences. And that is the economic part of my education. It's really important for economists to think of economic preferences. So for this particular day reconstruction study, we did not tell people about that they should set up the episode themselves, but we said the episode that you should think about is the morning. So please go through your morning chronologically from the time you woke up until lunch and answer the following questions. So everybody saw this, everybody saw the same for the afternoon, and then everybody saw the same for the evening. So we have data essentially for 3 episodes from everybody, morning, afternoon, and evening. So that's the first thing. That's the first step of the day reconstruction method, and with slightly bigger episodes. Then we asked them, we showed them again what they had written, and we asked them, please tell us whether you carried out any of these behaviors yesterday morning. The answer options are yes, no, but I could have, and not applicable, or I can't recall. And then we had a list of 20 different pro-environmental behaviors that we took from the literature. So I show you that list and also the basic descriptive statistics of what we found on this slide here. So you can see that saving electricity in the house is the one that was mentioned most often. Switching off electrical appliances, using a reusable cup or container for drinking, recycling, conserving water when it was not directly needed. You know, these are the things that are happening quite often in people's everyday lives, and not that often would be buying environmentally friendly products. You know, we don't buy stuff that often. Carpooling, educating myself about the environment. That's an interesting one as well, because people say that, yes, there are situations where we could do that, but we don't do that often. But in the end, we focus only on the dark blue items, and in the analysis that I present you later on, we kind of ignore the no, but I could have. It's a little bit complicated. But these are pro-environmental behaviors in everyday life. And it is a big question in the literature right now, whether we should look at them all individually or whether we should create an index that summarizes all of them. For this paper, the main thing is that we created an index. So what we did is we have 20 pro-environmental behaviors, and we have the morning, the afternoon, and the evening. So if somebody selected all the 20 behaviors 3 times, the sum of pro-environmental behaviors for an individual would be 60. So 60 would be the theoretical maximum. Nobody got to 60, but somebody got, maybe 2 participants got to 50. So they said basically yes to most pro-environmental behaviors. don't know to what extent that is true, but we keep them in there. Most people were about, between 15 and 20 pro-environmental behaviors they indicated yesterday. Now that's the outcome variable that we want to test. And what we were interested in to identify whether we can explain why some people indicate many pro-environmental behaviors, that would be on the right here, and why some people indicate only few pro-environmental behaviors, that would be on the left here. And in economic theory, we do utility maximization frameworks. We write down utility functions, and these utility functions can be influenced by risk, time, and social preferences. So it's slightly different to, say, psychology traits, because when we identify risk, time, and social preferences, we can get numbers that we can then include in models, and then we can predict also how strong behavioral change might be. So is a slightly different approach compared to typical psychological approaches to measure risk, time, and social preferences. I will show you how we measured risk, time, and social preferences, and that makes maybe more sense done. So for but the basic idea is, and you can think about this yourself, if you, for example, somebody who has a certain type of time preference, meaning that you're happy to wait for good stuff happening to you, so you're happy to delay gratification, then our hypothesis was you may be more likely to engage in pro-environmental behaviors, because a pro-environmental behavior could be costly today, but really good for the environment in the future, far away in the future. So, and if you're somebody who really cares more for the future than for today, you're patient, then you should be caring for engaging in many pro-environmental behaviors. Now let's start with risk. What would you prefer? And you can think about this for yourself. A 50% chance to win 300 euros when at the same time there's a 50% chance to win nothing. So it's a coin flip for 300 euros or pounds, or for sure 160 euros or pounds. And some of you will say, I will go for the sure payment of 160, might make sense. The next question then would reduce that 160 to maybe 140. And then you have the choice between 300 for a coin flip or 140 for sure. And if you still take the 140, the next question would go to 120. So 300 for sure, or 300 for a coin flip, or 120 for sure. And then there are 5 questions like this. So and then we get an individual measure for risk preferences. And we mix this with a more survey-based measure. In general, how willing or unwilling are you to take risks? And then we can mix this in a pre-specified way as suggested by these authors. That's risk preference. That's time preference. Would you rather receive £100 today or 154 in a year? And those people who say, I take the money now, then we increase the 154 for the next question. Would you have 100 today and 170 in 12 months? And so on. 5 questions of this type. And the survey question is, how willing or unwilling are you to give up something that is beneficial for you today in order to benefit more from that in the future? So that's a time preference. Of the social preferences, we ask for 4 different, but I show you only one, and that's the one for altruism. Imagine the following situation. Today you unexpectedly received £1,000. How much of this amount in pounds would you donate to a good cause? And people had to select something between 0 and 1,000. So 1,000 would be totally altruistic, 0 would be not at all altruistic. And we again mixed this with the question of how willing or unwilling are you to give to good causes without expecting anything in return. Now again, our question was, to what extent do these differences in economic preferences explain differences in how many pro-environmental behaviors people engage in their everyday lives? And I have to say, we were a little bit disappointed to see not too much, in particular patience. There's nothing with patience that surprised me. Altruism is the only one where we found a link. So on these graphs, you can see, for example, the altruism measure. On the left are those who are not very altruistic. On the right, those who are very altruistic. These are standardized scores. And on the on the vertical axis, you see the number of pro-environmental behaviors. So you see that there is an effect on altruism, but nothing on all of the other ones. So we did additional analyses, but this was one of the take-home messages. It seems to be the case that pro-environmental behavior seems to be driven to some extent by altruism. At least that's for future research to investigate. And stuff like risk, time, and positive, negative reciprocity and trust doesn't seem to be that relevant. If you want to read more, that's the paper. Do economic preferences predict pro-environmental behavior? Simple enough title. I'd go to the next paper if that's okay. That is actually using the same data. And that, again, is Kate and Till. These are the co-authors for this paper as well. And then I tell you how Michael and Barbara joined the team as well. Now it deals with subjective well-being. Because in the same data set, we also asked, how did you feel yesterday morning, afternoon, evening? Happy, frustrated, focused, and so on. So we have some data about subjective well-being, which is kind of nice. So what we can do easily is to have all of the individual pro-environmental behaviors and check if when somebody said that they carpooled, how happy were they at that moment. And in our data, you can see that when people said that they were carpooling, they were significantly more happy than in all other instances. And here, when people used both sides of the paper, they were significantly less happy. I don't know how to interpret this, but anyways, for example, generally you see there are some associations, but overall there doesn't seem to be big effects, big links between when people engage in pro-environmental behavior and subjective well-being. And this is relevant because there is a policy narrative arguing that when people engage in pro-environmental behaviors, actually that makes their lives better. So we should not think about pro-environmental behavior as something that is a sacrifice. Because some people argue that enacting in pro-environmental behavior makes your life better, you feel better at these moments, so it's not a sacrifice, it's actually something that is good. This data is not necessarily suggesting that. But we also asked, how much do you agree with the following statements? I felt that my morning was worthwhile and meaningful, or that I felt that I was useful to other people, or I felt that my morning helped me achieve important goals. These are different types of really important measures of subjective well-being. It's not how happy are you, but it is, are you doing something that's meaningful and worthwhile? That is a different type. Philosophers have long talked about this as a different type of subjective well-being that is called eudaimonic well-being. And when we correlate these type of eudaimonic well-being indices with our pro-environmental behaviors, we see that there's quite a lot of correlation. So when people reused or repaired an item, they also said that they were doing something that's meaningful or that's useful. And sometimes your life, these things are important for your life. It's not only about the happiness. Maybe you have a day that is not at all happy, but it's a very meaningful day, and then it was a good day as well. So that's an interesting fact that we found in this data. Now, what happened then is that we had data using the day reconstruction method to measure subjective well-being, SWB, and pro-environmental behavior, PEB. And Princik and Fredrickson, that's Michael and Barbara, had the same type of data, also using a day reconstruction method and subjective well-being and pro-environmental behavior. And we thought, oh, what can we do with that? And since we got along with them, we said, well, let's work together. This is what they found, and it is interesting that they find kind of different effects. They find stronger correlations between different sets of pro-environmental behaviors, and in the US, not in the UK, stronger associations with happiness, pleasant emotion, and almost nothing with eudaimonic emotions where we found something. So that is surprising. So we decided, look, we call it an accidental collaboration. I haven't seen this method of joining forces with others before, but it's really nice. We have one study, they have one study, and they are complementary. We have a UK sample, they have a US sample, we have morning, afternoon, evening. They have the full day with, on average, 10 episodes. Because we have only 3 episodes, we could ask for 20 pro-environmental behaviors. You cannot ask for so many when you have 10 episodes. They have fewer pro-environmental behaviors. So it's kind of nice that these studies are different, but different and sensible decisions. And we can also look at those items that are more or less similar. And then we see, study 1 is the US study from them, and study 2 is ours. And you see that there are some differences. So that begs the question, why are these differences there? For example, in eudaimonic, you see the blue study 2 estimates are all suggesting that there are correlations, and the red ones do not. So that's really interesting. So we designed a new study, and that finished yesterday. So it's really up to date. I don't have the results. So we have the data. We studied this for the last week. Basically, we checked and we manipulated, well, the sample. So we have data from the US and the UK, and we manipulated whether it's morning, afternoon, evening, or 3 episodes randomly chosen, like in the COVID study, to see whether it's the long episodes or the short episodes that play a role there. So we can check a few things to see whether they explain the differences. So I'm really looking forward to see the results. These are this is a suggestion by the reviewers. So we sent it to a journal, and the reviewer suggested, well, maybe find out where these differences come from. And then we are doing that right now. So hopefully we can send it back, and the reviewers are happy that we actually ran a new big pre-registered study. So it's a really nice form of collaborating with people you haven't known before based on very similar research ideas. So I really like that. Okay. Third study about meat consumption. Now, these first 2 studies were about pro-environmental behavior in general, and this study now is about one particular pro-environmental behavior, which is meat consumption, which can be motivated by, the problematic influence of meat consumption on the environment. Of course, animal welfare and health could be relevant as well, and that will feature later on. This is with Kate Laffan and Liam Delaney, both at the LSE London School of Economics. Now, you can ask yourself as well, do you intend increasing or reducing your consumption of meat in the next 6 months? You have an answer? Here's the results from 3 years ago now. Let's say Austria. We have 42% would say, I will consume less, or I will consume a little less. So these 42% in Austria would be our sample for this study. So this study is really focusing only on those people who say that they want to consume less meat in the next time. So you see other countries here as well. So this is a study about those people with intentions to reduce meat consumption. And we know there's the famous idea of the intention behavior gap. We often have green intentions. We want to be environmentally friendly. We want to be healthy. We want to save for retirement and so on. But then something happens and we don't. And this is really interesting and important in the meat context, important for policy making as well, because if for environmental reasons you want to reduce meat, but for ethical reasons you don't want to tell people what to do, but if you then can help people who already want to reduce their meat consumption well, then the ethical problem is not so big and the environmental benefits are still there. So it's quite relevant. So a lot of the literature on the intention behavior gap in this context in general focuses on individual specific explanations for the gap. That is, Eva, maybe you're really good at keeping up your intentions and I'm really horrible at it. These are individual differences. That's not what we focus on in this paper. So a lot has been done. We focus on context. So this is linked to nudges. Nudges change the context and therefore change the way we make decisions. So for example, you might be really good in at dinner, but really bad when you're out with friends in making sure your intention to reduce your meat consumption works. So this is what we look at. Context-specific predictors of when we manage or don't manage our intentions to reduce meat consumption. So we look at within individual differences, and there are many theoretical reasons why this is actually interesting. For example, there's this concept of cue-triggered desires, and that's so if you walk past by McDonald's and they push all this air of the roasted burgers on the road, and you smell it and you're hungry already, then that's a cue, and maybe you really want some burger then afterwards. That's a literature that's interesting because it maybe is a problem for your self-control. You have strong temptations suddenly and cannot control yourself. Cue-triggered habits is also really interesting. Habits are such an important concept, and sometimes these are cue-triggered. So if you always go to the same cafeteria or Mensa, and then you always go into the same queue, maybe the Mensa is a queue that triggered a specific habit, and without thinking about it, you're in the meat queue, for example. Situational social norms. If you're invited to a barbecue, the chances are that the social norm is to have some meat, whereas if you're invited to another place, maybe friends, maybe there's no meat, there's social norms that differ by situation. And sometimes you have responsibility over your choice. For example, when you're at home or when you're at work doing your own meals, and sometimes you're a guest, then you have less responsibility over the choice. So also a context factor that is potentially interesting. Okay. Now, this paper. In which situations are people most likely to have intention behavior gaps related to meat consumption? So I think this is really interesting question. It's difficult to answer though, so we try to answer it in the best way possible using the day reconstruction method. So we focus on people who have intentions to reduce meat consumption in the next 4 weeks. And it's a pre-registered study. And typically when you pre-register studies, you have very specific hypotheses, but we have too many correlations that we check for. I think this is an interesting question to check whether there are situational predictors of intention behavior gaps in the context of meat. Our sample size will only be people who want to reduce their meat consumption. And we do the same as we did with the COVID study. We take a snapshot of the everyday lives of people and find many predictors. Okay. There is a lot of literature that I will skip. So this is what we did. We had first a pre-screener of 1,500. We used Prolific. That's a website where we can get study participants and pay for them. 1,500 is the maximum you can get for a nationally representative sample in the UK. So we did that in order to get some nationally representative data. And then we did a booster study with 3,000 people in order to get more of these meat reducers. We did a baseline survey with the meat reducers. And then we did event reconstruction study, actually 633 people. We did event reconstruction, we call it now, because it was not about the whole day, but it was about a specific event, that event being breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So we ignored snacks. So I will show you what we do. And I will show you the data of 633 people who want to reduce their meat consumption and then do the event reconstruction exercise with us. Now, as I said, it's based on the day reconstruction method that I talked about before, but it is about an event. It's like taking a screenshot of whatever people are eating. It's not as low on recall burden compared to the smartphone studies, but still it's potentially really interesting diary approach, and you'll see some data. This is what we did, and this is a screenshot of what participants saw as well. Again, we have step 1 and step 2. Step 1 is something we could call revivification, basically making it very salient or attention grabbing, or making it easy for people to remember what they had for breakfast yesterday. Please describe your breakfast in a few words. Mention the type of food, where you got it from, and how good, bad it tasted. Leave the box empty if you didn't have breakfast. We asked this first, then the lunch, and then the dinner. And then again, we showed them what they had written there, and then we asked follow-up questions. And I show you 3 of the follow-up questions first. And these 3 follow-up questions are something we call the outcome variables, the 3 variables that we wanted to better understand. And the idea of this is that by using all 3 of these outcome variables, we get closer to the idea of what intention behavior gaps are, because we have this specific sample of people who all want to reduce their meat consumption. So the first one is the desire to eat meat. Did you want to eat meat at breakfast yesterday? And then we explained that wanting to eat meat could mean basically everything. So that's interesting links to certain literature as well. So whether people wanted to eat meat is the first question. Whether people actually ate meat is the second. And we just asked them, what did you eat? And then we coded those that selected red, poultry, and pork, and so on. Red meat seems to be the worst from an environmental perspective. So in follow-ups, robustness checks, we looked at that as well. But generally, for the main results, we just coded everything that's meat as meat. And then regretful consumption. In retrospect, do you regret what you ate for breakfast yesterday? Because if then in retrospect, we are now a day later, if they regret what they ate, chances are that it was really an intention behavior gap. Not a perfect measure of intention behavior, but as close as we can get with this methodology. And then we have a really long list of predictors, and they are all theoretically informed. And I will show them later on when you see the results, and then we can talk about them. They're temporal, physical, social, some decision factors, and psychological, situational characteristics. A funny diamond scale, which you will see later. Okay.
Leonhard, there is a question from Nurit Noble. Is it okay if he asked it?
Yes, Nurit, if you want to go for it.
Yes, hi. Thanks. This is super interesting. I have so many questions, but I'll just ask one. The sample size was different between your first survey and then the people actually filling in the diary thing. But were they the same people? So was it that from the survey, the people that had intention, was that the 636?
Yes. So
Okay.
of the 4,500 that we had in the pre-screener, where we asked them, do you want to reduce your meat consumption? 633 said that they had the intention and that they completed the day reconstruction. So not everybody completed in the follow-up study.
Okay.
In order to get better data on how many people actually want to reduce their meat consumption, I will show you on the next slide the data only from the 1,500 nationally representative sample.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so let's go to that one. So this is now based on actually 1492. And of these people, 1.5, 5, and 2.8 said that they're vegan, vegetarian, or pescatarian. They are not in our sample. They are not in our sample. 20.3% of the meat eaters reported intentions to reduce their meat consumption. So they are in our sample. So these 20.3 times, of this, but additionally, there are others from the booster sample who also reported meat consumption. But this is now only based on the nationally representative sample. So what are the reasons for reducing or for their intentions to reduce meat consumption? The big three are health, environment, and animal welfare. And then some others are relevant as well: expense, views of or habits of others, social circle, religion, or politics. But health, environment, and welfare seem to be the main ones, and that is also in line with, the newspaper and all many other studies that these are the three motivators. Okay, but this is the 1,492, and the rest will be data from 633, and they could give us up to 6 data points, because we had the morning, the breakfast, the lunch, and the dinner, and some of them participated twice in 2-day reconstruction exercises. Now, here is the percentages, how often they indicated a desire to eat meat or how often they ate meat, and now when they said they at least regretted meat a little bit. And you can see these little, the square and the triangle, these are indicating that these are the way I will present the results in a second. So for example, the circle will be regretful meat consumption. I'll explain this in a second. First result, not the clearest, but an interesting effect for a UK audience, because what we have here is everything compared to the Monday. So for example, we see that there's not a big difference in terms of Tuesday and Monday, although on Tuesday people have a little bit less meat desires. But the main effect, maybe if you look at that triangle, is that people eat more meat on Sunday than on Monday. And in the UK, that's the Sunday roast. It's a historical thing in the UK that they meet and have a big meat dish. But yeah, so that's, in order to understand these graphs, what you have to know is that we always have a baseline category in in this case, it's Monday. And then all the other variables here compare how much people wanted meat, ate meat, or regretted meat compared to Monday. So if, for example, the lowest triangle here has a horizontal line that does not go over the vertical 0 line, it means that there's a statistical significant effect that people on a Sunday ate more meat than on a Monday. That's to understand them. I show you some that are maybe a tiny bit more interesting. This one, for example, shows us that people are much more likely to want, eat, and regret meat at lunch, and even more so at dinner. So breakfast is not that meaty. And this is interesting, I think. When people are at home, they eat less meat than when they're eating out. So eating out means there's much more chances that you have meat. Maybe it is because people want to enjoy being in a restaurant, or maybe they have rules of not buying meat at home. We can have many interpretations of this, but you do see that when people are eating out, they eat more meat and want and regret more meat. Similar, but to a lesser degree, when people are at a friend or a family home, but there's no difference between work and school. So when people are at school or at work, than when they're eating at home, which I think is interesting, maybe because of the responsibility that is with you to eat. And here's a social predictors. So when you're with your children, no difference to when you're alone. But when you're with your partner, when you're with family or with friends, you tend to be more likely to eat, want, and regret meat. So I think that's also interesting because these seem to be, social situations, and it seems that social situations favor meat consumption for these meat reducers. And again, you can come up with a story, well, everybody might have a different story here. I'm just presenting the snapshot, which I think could be interesting. I only included this one here because it has some interesting, hope you can see that. Can you see that I zoomed a little bit? Very good, yeah. So it just has the sort of demographics that we controlled for. So females are less likely to want, eat, and regret meat. And the older you get, the less likely you get to want, eat, and regret meat. And there's very little on education. So I know people are always interested in gender differences and age differences. So I'm showing you this. And this is the same everywhere. I think it's interesting. Okay. Now, self-reported decision factors is the next independent variable, and next a variable that we try to use to better understand why people sometimes want meat and eat and regret it. Thinking specifically about your breakfast yesterday, or your lunch, or your dinner, how important were the following factors for the decision to eat the particular food items you had? Now, these are the following factors that we asked them. Taste, craving, quality, cost, origin, organic, and so on. So at the bottom, you see animal welfare, and this is helpful to understand these factors. So when people said animal welfare was really, really important for me, we would expect that they do not eat meat at that situation. So this is what we will see. So we will see some results where people say, for example, when they said that taste is really important for me, are they more likely to eat meat or less likely to eat meat? You can already make predictions here about what you believe this is. And in fact, we ordered them now according to whether people have meat desire. So when people say taste is important, they have meat desires, they eat meat, but they don't regret eating meat. When people have a craving, they want meat and they eat meat and they regret having eaten meat. So, there are these interesting stories that you can identify here. If quality is important, you have a meat desire, you eat meat, and you do not regret eating meat because you wanted maybe a high quality food. What else is interesting? Ethics, if ethics is important, well, you don't regret it. If nutrition is important, you absolutely don't regret it, but you also don't eat meat that often, interestingly. These are all individual regressions, so that's a bit technical. So I leave this. So these are individual regressions here. Convenience, if convenience is important for you, you don't eat meat. I don't have a good interpretation for this, but there's no regret, and that seems to make sense. So I think, again, there are many stories we can come up. So I think this is an interesting snapshot taking of the experience of everyday meat reducers. Now, the diamond scale. How much does each
Leonhard?
Yes.
I would like to give the others the chance to ask questions. So I don't know whether you probably can wrap it up or you just go quickly to the end, because otherwise we won't have time asking you interesting questions. Is this okay?
Absolutely. Let me wrap up. Diamond scale, stuff like duty, intellect, advertising. So if people said mating was important, they eat meat. If people said it's very positive, they eat meat. If people say I'm on duty, I'm at work, they don't eat meat. So, again, interesting things that we can find here. Key takeaways: hedonism, situational factors encouraging hedonic consumption. This being with other people, enjoying your day, that seems to be the situations where you eat meat. When you're alone, you're less likely to eat meat, but when you're in social, when you're with others, in these positive mood situations, that seems to be the situational factors where you're at risk at not achieving your intention. That's the paper, if you're interested to read. Conclusion, one slide. The day reconstruction method has advantages and disadvantages. I'm really excited about it because it allows illustrating and communicating the human experience. all of these insights, they all kind of make sense, and maybe we find it logical, but different people will see different things that are interesting with these type of data. So I think it's a really good way of mapping or illustrating how we live our lives as humans. But it is recalled, often hypothetical. Social desirability bias is a problem. But I do believe that there's a lot of potential for better understanding experiences and behaviors, and potentially also policy making if some policymakers want to interpret it in the ways that they want to. Thanks to my co-authors and you for listening.
Thank you very much, Leonhard. This was a really, really interesting talk, not only about the day reconstruction method, but also about pro-environmental behavior.